Welcome to my transparent watercolor tutorial, Everett Road Bridge. This is a narrated step-by-step tutorial set at normal speed. This is the companion video to my transparent watercolor demonstration video, which is set to music at 3x speed to watch the uninterrupted evolution of the painting. On the right is my reference photo and inspiration for this painting. It's the Everett Road Bridge, which sits in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Before I began painting, I made the decision that I was going to mask some of the areas in this painting. Specifically, I wanted to save some of the whites on the linear tree shapes and some of the highlights on the rocks and the bridge. I also used the splattering of masking fluid to create some texture in the foliage and some of the ground cover. I'm going to cover some of these masking techniques in another video. I'm going to begin this painting by applying a wash in the sky area. I'm using cerulean blue and Halloween orange. The Halloween orange mixed with the cerulean blue gives me a neutral, and that combination of the blue and the neutral gives some variation in the sky. I'm applying this wash with a 1-inch flat brush. It's actually a squirrel synthetic blend and does a nice job. I'm going to take some of that cerulean blue and I'm going to put it down in the water area to show some reflection of the sky. Ideally, for better composition with a landscape, you want to have 1/3 sky to 2/3 land, or 2/3 sky to 1/3 land, and where you divide that paper. In my reference photo, it shows some of that sky dipping below, but if I do that, I'm going to split this composition right down the middle horizontally, which isn't a very good design. So rather than paint that sky color below the bridge, I'm going to make that just ground cover and keep it a 2/3 to 1/3 ratio. Here I've started to apply a wash of sap green, and it has some pyrrole red mixed in with it. You can see that change there in the color. The red and green on opposite sides of the color wheel there helps take that green towards neutral. And also to brighten this up, I've got a mixture of quinacridone coral and quinacridone gold that I'm applying in there, and that kind of takes on a bright burnt sienna tone. And I also have a little bit of sepia with some of that burnt sienna mixture that gives a little darker brown. So I'm using quite a variety of color in this wash, and I'm gradating one color into the other. Here I start to take some of that color combination of the sap green and the sienna tones down into the water to show some of the reflecting into the water. If you've seen some of my videos, you know I often take a fine mist sprayer and soften some of the edges or diffuse the color. That's what I'm doing here, but I'm using this very small atomizer that I picked up that it's handy for delivering a fine spray into a smaller area than the larger one that I often use. They both work very well. This one just delivers a smaller area of coverage. I'm going to begin working with a much darker tone here on the underside of this bridge, and I'm using a mixture of royal blue, sepia with a little bit of pyro red worked into it. Here I have a sepia and royal blue mixture, which is a much cooler dark tone, and I've positioned that beside the much redder mixture that I applied to start. And you can see as I apply that, my paper is wet there, and I'm getting some of that effect, some of that diffusion from the wet paper that's there that works well with the as a reflection. And I'll mention that this dark that I'm applying here is pretty dark pretty early. I don't normally go this dark on the value scale at this point in my painting, but I knew I'm going to have a dark shadow there, and I wanted to work that into the reflection before I went too far, so I probably went a little darker than what I normally would do. I would normally build that up a little bit more. So here I'm using a little bit of dry brush, and it's a combination of dragging the brush on the side, and I have applied that masking fluid before I begin to paint, which gives some of that textural quality in there also. And then I come in with a spray bottle and soften some of the edges, so I have the combination of the dry brush texture along with some softened edges. And you can see as I apply this paint, you can see the resistance where the masking fluid is in some of those areas. Now I'm working with this mixture of quinacridone coral and quinacridone gold, which gives this burnt sienna tone, but a little bit brighter. And I have put a touch of burnt sienna in there with it because I didn't want it too bright. And I'm just applying it along the ground cover here, and again I have that texture being created by the masking fluid, which I applied before I begin to paint. And now I'm going to work that tone down into the water for some reflections, and I'm going to come in and soften that and diffuse that a little bit with a spray bottle. Now I've taken some of that same dark value color over to the other side of this composition, and I'm starting to work some of that sap green pyro red mixture up to suggest the foliage on the trees. You can see I'm not rendering these with a small brush. I've got a soft wash brush, and I'm just making shapes and making marks to suggest the foliage is there, but I'm not rendering it with a little brush to try and paint a tree. I still have my sap green mixture, but I've put in some yellow ochre and working that tone into the trees and some of these tree shapes. I'm beginning to put a wash on this bridge structure, and I've got a wash of yellow ochre, and then I'm going to come in with a mixture that's quinacridone coral with just a touch of royal blue in it. And I'm just making, trying to make expressive brush strokes as I apply this wash. And you can see I've got a little bit more blue now into this mixture of the quinacridone coral and royal blue. So I'm trying to still work some warm against cool. I'm not overworking these brush strokes or trying to render individual boards on this. I'm just giving the suggestion of light hitting it and the various warm and cool tones being cast by shadows. I'm going to work this red mixture back into the trees so you can see that the bridge is carrying back into that shape. Now I'm taking that red tone down into the water again to suggest reflection. So I have this still moist wash on my paper here of this red. I'm going to take a scraper, it's like a plastic scraping tool, and I'm just going to indicate some linear shapes in here that represent the side of the bridge, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to put some of those same marks in the bridge. Taking this plastic scraper, and your paper has to still be wet, your paint has to still be wet. You'll get to a point where it won't work, and if it's too wet, then the mixture will just flood back in and the lines will disappear. So when you get to where there's just a bit of a sheen on the paint, you can come in with some kind of a plastic scraper, it could be a credit card, and you can just indicate some of these marks. So here again, I'm just giving the suggestion of these boards that make up this bridge, and I'm not using a brush and rendering each little board. I'm just trying to create texture and shape and just give the suggestion of what's there. So I'm bringing in a darker green tone here. This is still a mixture of sap green and pyrrole red. And as I darken this mixture by adding a little bit of royal blue. And you can see I'm still just painting shapes, and you can see the masking fluid coming through. So still a little darker here, and I want to create a little bit of dark value texture, so I'm putting some paint on my brush and I'm just tapping it and just giving a little bit of a splatter, which gives some texture. You have to be kind of careful when you're doing this, and make sure you don't get it in the unwanted areas, such as the sky, where you may not want it so much. And you can just cover it with a Kleenex or tissue if you want to protect it. I'm taking a dark value and giving a suggestion of this edge of the roof where it's going to be in shadow, and into the bridge itself, just using this same dark tone and taking it down into the entry of the bridge. Here I'm putting in a very dark tone, and I'm painting wet on dry with a very well pointed brush here. It's a quill brush that I'm using, and it holds a lot of paint, but it comes to a very fine point. Continue to work with this darker value, which is a dark mixture of royal blue, sepia, and a little bit of burnt sienna worked in there, but it's pretty much a dark gray. I'm giving some touches there in the shadow areas, and I'm going to come in with a little bit lighter mixture of that, and I'm going to paint on the underside of this bridge. You can see I have a flat brush here. It's about a 1/2 inch flat brush, and it's good for just making very narrow straight line marks like this. I'm going to take a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, which basically gives me a middle value gray, and I'm going to start indicating this rocky shoreline and its reflection. So just taking this soft wash brush and giving the indication of some rocks and a rocky edge. And I'm going to soften that up a little bit with a fine mist spray. I'm going to take some of this same color and maybe a little lighter, and I'm going to start indicating these rocky shapes in the foreground and its reflection. Initially I was going to do much more rendering on these, but I've decided to leave this more as a resting place. You can't have the same level of activity everywhere in your composition, so they get so busy everywhere and is equal everywhere in terms of the level of detail, and the eye doesn't have a place to rest. I'm going to use these rock shapes more as a resting place and draw you into the composition a little further in there where the bridge is, and make that more my center of interest. Well, I have a reference photo, and it's my inspiration for this painting. You hear me speaking more of shapes and centers of interest and resting areas and texture. I'm not talking about the detail of the photograph and saying there's a rock here and I'm going to render it, because I'm not trying to do a reproduction of a photo. I'm trying to create art here, and I'm trying to represent the essence of what's in the photo through painting. So while I'm trying to do a representation of this photograph of reference I have, I'm more concerned about the design elements of texture and shapes and values than I am I reproducing the photograph. Here I'm working with a cool dark value of sepia and royal blue, and I'm given the indication of linear tree shapes that are working their way through what I already have there. And keep in mind, I have this masking fluid here where some of these areas are masked with some of the linear shapes and there's texture. So shortly here I'm going to be lifting that masking fluid off, and some of those areas are going to be very bright white, and there's going to be quite a bit of contrast between those areas and this dark valued wash. I'm going to take a little bit of this darker tone, it's a neutral, and just give the indication here in the water of some of these value changes, some of the ripples that occur in a creek like this, and they're going across some of the reflections, which creates some more area of interest. I'm going to come in with a pickup eraser and start removing my masking fluid. So now you'll start to see the white of the paper coming through in the areas where I preserve some of the whites and the highlights. And some of those are linear shapes, some of those have textural quality to them. So you can see how much of the white of the paper has been preserved, and just because I had masked those areas off doesn't mean I'm going to leave them pure white. So here I'm coming in on these linear tree shapes, and I'm putting the very dark side, shadowed side of the trees with a dark valued wash. Continuing to come in and put a wash over some of these areas, and I'm using a burnt sienna sepia mixture there to give that kind of a light sienna tone, and then I have some yellow ochre which I'm bringing in, and a mixture of a gray of ultramarine and burnt sienna. So I'm trying to work warm and cool throughout this these linear tree shapes. I continue to work my way around the composition, and I'm taking some lighter grays into this side of the composition, and I'm going to start working also some gold tones, some yellow ochre, and hit some of this ground cover in some of these trees. So while I save these areas as whites, some of them are just going to be lights, not necessarily white. Such as here, where I'm taking this gold tone and a little burnt sienna, and I'm just putting a glaze over it so you can see the textural quality coming through because of the transparency, but it's no longer a pure white. And but I didn't want to save all that area as pure white, but you still have the sparkle, some of those textures where there is pure white still coming through. I'm taking a rigger brush, and I've got a dark value. I'm just giving some touches of this value along some of these tree shapes. They have a light gray tone to them, and then this very dark value to indicate shadow side has a nice contrast with that light gray. I also want to take some of these dark valued linear shapes underneath the bridge here to suggest that those trees are continuing down. Now I'm going to take that rigger brush, and with that same dark value, I'm going to start giving some not only the shadowing on some of these existing tree shapes that I have, but I'm going to start giving the indication of some more darker branches weaving their way through the thick of this. I'm going to take these in different directions. It helps give some dimension, some depth to the painting, because you have these kind of dark valued branches spread out through the foliage and over top of the bridge, and it just helps give a feeling of depth. I'm coming in with this 1/2 inch brush, and I'm giving the indication of the texture and the siding on this bridge using a darker valued red. And I'll use the side of the brush, the tip of the brush, the corner of the brush to do this. So I thought I was done. I even signed it in the bottom left, as you can see. And then I decided I just didn't go dark enough with the tone on this bridge. So I decided to mix myself some more color, and I've come back with this same brush, and I'm given the indication again of the side of this bridge, but I'm doing it with a much darker valued tone. And you can still see how I drag the brush from this the tip, and I drag it on the side, and I turn it and I rotate it, and I'm creating this dry brush texture on the bridge. But it's much darker value than what I had, and I'm going to take this same tone, the same value, and this texture, and take a little bit of it down into the water to give a suggestion here of this reflection. You can see what part of the brush I'm using to do this, and it's dry brush, but I'm dragging the side of the brush. And that's my painting, Everett Road Bridge. I hope you enjoyed and learned from this video, and I thank you for watching.